The gentle scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the café, mingling with the quiet hum of conversations. The atmosphere was typical for a busy day until an elderly man entered, drawing everyone's attention. At 89 years old, his frail figure and slow, shuffling steps spoke of a life burdened by age and hardship. His thin, bent frame was clad in faded, worn-out clothing, offering little protection against the day's chill. The shoes on his feet were so tattered that his toes peeked through the holes. He moved cautiously toward the counter, his trembling hands clutching a few coins. As he passed, murmurs and disapproving glances followed him, but he seemed accustomed to the silent judgment. Hunger gnawed at him, propelling him forward, despite the visible discomfort of those around him. He kept his eyes down, avoiding the stares, knowing he was unwelcome. Reaching the counter, he carefully placed his coins on the surface. The café's owner, Marcella, a stern woman with a reputation for being cold-hearted, eyed him with clear disdain. Her stained apron matched her sour expression. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Just the cheapest sandwich, please," he said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. His calloused fingers fumbled with the coins as he tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. Marcella, however, crossed her arms and glared at him. "This isn't a shelter for the homeless," she snapped. "If you can't pay, you can't eat here." Her words cut deeply, but the man held his composure. "Please," he begged softly, "anything you can spare. I'm very hungry." His quiet plea went unanswered as the room seemed to grow heavier with discomfort. Conversations turned to hushed whispers, but no one stepped in to help. Seated nearby, a woman dressed in elegant attire observed the scene with growing unease. Her attention was drawn to a bracelet on the man's wrist. Her breath caught as recognition struck her, and her heart began to race. Rising from her seat, she approached him hesitantly, her expression a mixture of shock and urgency. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice trembling. "Where did you get that bracelet?" The elderly man looked up, startled, and his weary eyes met hers. As she inspected the bracelet more closely, her face turned pale, her emotions evident as realization dawned. The café seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for what would happen next. "There are no leftovers here, go somewhere else." Silent chuckles spread through the room, and a nearby customer shook his head with a mocking grin. "Yeah, that's right, get out, old man. We don't want your kind here." Tears welled in Yeppy's eyes as he froze, caught between leaving and trying once more. His empty stomach growled, and shame burned through him, making him feel smaller with every passing second. In that moment, he felt utterly invisible, as if his entire existence was being dismissed. The room's silence weighed heavily, amplifying his humiliation. He wanted to vanish, but his legs wouldn't carry him away. Just as all hope seemed lost and despair clouded his thoughts, the café door swung open again. The sudden entrance of a poised and confident woman broke the tension. Isabella, with her perfectly styled brown hair and tailored suit, strode into the room with purpose. Her sharp gaze swept over the scene, taking in the old man's distress and the smirks of those around him. Without a moment's hesitation, Isabella approached the counter. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Marcella, who moments earlier had exuded arrogance, now appeared uncertain, aware of the influential woman standing before her. Isabella wasn't an ordinary customer, she was well known in the city for her high-end boutiques and commanding presence. "What's going on here?" Isabella asked, her voice calm but carrying a tone of disapproval. Her eyes rested briefly on Yeppy, offering a reassuring smile, before turning back to Marcella. The café fell into a hushed anticipation, every patron watching to see how the situation would unfold. Marcella faltered, attempting to regain control. "I already told him we don't serve people like him here," she said defensively. "This isn't the place for that kind of person." Isabella's demeanor remained composed, but a sharp intensity glinted in her eyes. "People like him," she repeated, leaning forward slightly. Are we speaking about a human being or something less? Her words cut through the room like a blade, silencing even the quiet whispers. The same customers who had earlier snickered at Yeppy's misfortune now sat awkwardly, their expressions shifting between curiosity and discomfort. Marcella, visibly unnerved, tried to hold her ground, but Isabella's quiet strength left no room for further debate. Turning back to Yeppy, Isabella smiled gently. "Don't worry, sir. Your meal is on me today." Yeppy stared at her in disbelief, his tear-filled eyes now glimmering with a faint spark of hope. As the café watched, Isabella's intervention transformed what had been a moment of cruelty into one of compassion, leaving everyone to reflect on the unexpected turn of events. With unwavering determination, Isabella refused to back down. Yeppy, who had kept his gaze fixed on the floor until that moment, lifted his head to glance at the woman standing up for him. His trembling hands still held the few coins he had painstakingly gathered. He struggled to find words, but they seemed lodged in his throat, unable to escape. A mixture of gratitude and disbelief washed over him. "I'll cover whatever he needs," Isabella said firmly, directing her attention to Yeppy. "He has just as much right to be here as anyone else." Her eyes swept over the room, daring anyone to challenge her stance. Marcella, desperate to reassert her authority, let out a dismissive laugh. "This isn't a charity. If he can't pay, he doesn't belong here. That's how business works." Isabella, her tone calm yet cutting, interrupted with a faint, ironic smile. "Business thrives on people, Marcella, and it seems you've forgotten that." She took a step closer to the counter, addressing not only Marcella but everyone present. "I've been a loyal customer here for years, and I never thought I'd witness something so heartless." The café fell silent as whispers ceased, and all eyes turned to the unfolding confrontation. Marcella's unease was evident. She knew Isabella's influence in the community was significant, and a public clash could tarnish her reputation. Still, her stubborn pride kept her from conceding. "This isn't a shelter," Marcella said, crossing her arms in a defiant stance. "If he doesn't have money, there's nothing I can do for him." Isabella let out a quiet chuckle, though her piercing gaze remained steady. "You talk about charity, but fail to see that you're treating a person as if they're worth less than nothing. Charity is a choice. Humanity should not be." Yeppy, who had been watching silently, felt a whirlwind of emotions. Rarely had anyone spoken up for him, especially with such conviction. The sting of humiliation began to fade, replaced by a flicker of hope. He could barely hold back the tears threatening to spill as he absorbed Isabella's words. Noticing his emotional state, Isabella leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "Today, you can eat whatever you like," she said gently. Placing a comforting hand over his, she pushed his coins back toward him. "Keep this. Don't worry about it." Marcella, visibly flustered and aware of the growing tension in the room, mumbled begrudgingly, "Fine, ma'am. If that's what you want, so be it. But this won't happen again." With an unflinching gaze and a composed smile, Isabella replied, "What won't happen again, Marcella? Treating someone with dignity." Her words hung in the air, resonating with everyone present, leaving Marcella without a retort. The once hostile room now carried an air of reflection as Isabella's quiet strength transformed the mood entirely. Isabella's voice remained steady, her words slicing through the tense atmosphere. "The way you treat people here speaks volumes. I'll make sure everyone knows how your business operates." Marcella froze, understanding the weight those words carried. The surrounding customers, while hesitant to step in, appeared to reevaluate what they had just witnessed. Yeppy, regaining a fragment of his dignity, was guided to a table by one of the staff under Isabella's watchful eye. She followed him with a mixture of sorrow and fulfillment etched across her face. Something about him stirred a deep empathy within her, an unexplainable connection that she couldn't quite put into words. As Yeppy settled uneasily into his seat, Isabella approached with a softer demeanor. "Now, sir, what would you like to eat? You must be hungry," so let's fix that, she said warmly. Her earlier assertiveness had melted into genuine kindness. Yeppy, overwhelmed, murmured, I don't know how to thank you, ma'am. What you've done for me. There's no need for thanks, Isabella replied with a gentle smile. Let's start with a good meal, and we can talk afterward. The waiter, though clearly reluctant, delivered Yeppy's meal under Isabella's sharp gaze. A modest sandwich and a cup of coffee were placed before him with little ceremony. Yeppy stared at the food, his hands trembling as if expecting the moment to dissolve like an illusion. Sensing his hesitation, Isabella reassured him, go ahead. It's yours. You deserve this. With a hesitant nod, Yeppy took his first bite. The hunger that had gnawed at him seemed to strip away the humiliation he had felt moments ago. Each slow, deliberate bite reflected not just physical relief but emotional release. Isabella sat quietly, observing him, an unusual feeling brewing in her chest, a blend of compassion and something deeper she couldn't quite identify. As Yeppy ate, the café resumed a semblance of normalcy, though the tension lingered beneath the surface. Marcella, visibly flustered, retreated to the counter, whispering sharply to her staff and casting furtive glances at the table where Isabella and Yeppy sat. The space buzzed with an uneasy calm, as though everyone anticipated the situation wasn't entirely resolved. At that moment, Isabella adjusted her bag on the table, drawing Yeppy's attention. His eyes caught a glimmer on her wrist, something familiar yet unexpected. Yeppy's gaze flickered toward the faint glint of an old watch on his wrist. At first, Isabella barely noticed, but something about the piece caught her attention. Its design and shape tugged at a buried memory. She blinked, as if trying to push away a distant recollection. Mr. Yeppy, she said, her voice laced with curiosity. May I see your watch? Yeppy hesitated, momentarily pausing his meal. His hand moved toward the accessory, almost as though he'd forgotten it was there. Oh, this? He murmured, carefully unfastening the strap. As he passed the watch to Isabella, he explained, it's a keepsake from someone very dear to me. Isabella's fingers trembled as she held the timepiece. The cold metal seemed to transport her to a time she thought she had long since locked away. Turning it over, she examined the back, and her heart stopped. There, delicately engraved, was a name that sent a shiver down her spine, Emmanuel. Her hand flew to her mouth as a wave of shock swept over her. It was unmistakable. This watch was the very one she had gifted years ago to the man who had meant everything to her, the man she had tragically lost. How did you come by this watch? Isabella's voice wavered, her gaze fixed on the object as though it had unlocked an old wound. Yeppy, noticing the shift in her demeanor, answered cautiously. It was a gift, he said softly, a gift from my son, Emmanuel. The word struck Isabella like a thunderclap, confirming her fears. Her Emmanuel, the man she had loved and mourned, was Yeppy's son. A storm of emotions surged through her, grief, longing, and disbelief. Yeppy, still unaware of the depth of her reaction, continued, he passed away many years ago. After he was gone, life was never the same. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, but she fought to maintain her composure. The revelation was overwhelming. Emmanuel had vanished from her life so abruptly that she never had the chance to say goodbye. And now, here sat his father, a man broken by life's hardships, holding the only link to her past love. Emmanuel was, she began, but her voice faltered under the weight of her emotions. Yeppy, beginning to piece things together, asked hesitantly, you knew my son? His tone was a mix of surprise and sorrow. Isabella nodded, her voice too fragile to respond immediately. She looked at Yeppy, her eyes brimming with a mixture of tenderness and heartbreak. I loved him, she finally confessed, her voice trembling. In a voice so soft it barely reached above a whisper, Yeppy confessed, I loved him more than anything in this world. The silence that followed was laden with unspoken emotions. He appeared stunned, struggling to grasp the weight of her revelation. Isabella, clutching the watch tightly in her hands, seemed as if letting go would shatter a fragile link to the past she cherished so deeply. "Why didn't I know about you?" Yeppy finally asked, his voice trembling with both curiosity and sorrow. Isabella inhaled deeply, bracing herself to revisit the painful memories she had long buried. "It's a long story," she began, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, Yeppy transformed from a stranger in need to someone intricately connected to her most cherished and painful memories. Isabella held Emmanuel's watch with the utmost care, as if it were made of the thinnest glass. Each detail, the worn metal, the faint engraving, the way Emmanuel used to absent-mindedly spin it around his wrist, brought forth a flood of emotions. It was as though every memory of him came rushing back at once, overwhelming her with feelings she thought she had left behind. Yeppy, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, observed her intently. He recognized that look, the unmistakable grief of someone who had truly loved Emmanuel. It mirrored the same ache he had carried since losing his son. "He never spoke of you," Yeppy murmured, his voice unsteady. There was a hesitation in his tone, as though he wasn't sure if he wanted to hear what came next, yet he felt compelled to know. Isabella sighed deeply, her fingers still wrapped around the watch. "I don't even know how to begin," she admitted, her voice tinged with melancholy. "We met when we were young. I was working in a small boutique, it was my first job in the city. Emmanuel would visit often, bringing donations to the orphanage where I grew up. That's how we became close." Yeppy's brows furrowed in surprise. "An orphanage," he repeated. Isabella nodded solemnly, her expression clouded with memories. "Yes, I was raised there after losing my parents as a child. That place became my home. It was there that I met Emmanuel. He was kind, full of life, and always so selfless. We dreamed of a future together, made so many plans," her voice faltered, the weight of what could have been pressing down on her. "But life had other plans." Yeppy remained silent, absorbing every word. The pain in Isabella's voice resonated deeply, mirroring his own. Listening to her story, he realized there was an entire chapter of Emmanuel's life that he had never known, a side of his son that had been lost to him forever. Yeppy's hands trembled as he tried to process her words. His heart ached, torn between sorrow and gratitude for finding someone who had shared such a deep connection with Emmanuel. "I never knew this part of his life," he murmured, his gaze dropping. "After Emmanuel's death, Victoria, my wife, she always blamed someone. She said he drifted away because of a woman. But she never told me more. All I knew was that after we lost him, nothing was ever the same." The mention of Victoria made Isabella tense. She needed no further clarification to recognize whom Yeppy was referring to. Memories of strained, distant encounters with a stern woman whose approval was impossible to earn came rushing back. Isabella's voice wavered as she replied, "Victoria never accepted me. She didn't think I was good enough for her son, and that created a rift. Emmanuel was caught in the middle, trying to meet his family's expectations while pursuing the life he wanted. It was a difficult time for both of us." Yeppy lifted his gaze, visibly moved. He had never truly understood the weight Emmanuel had carried, the inner conflict that had driven him away from his family. "Victoria always made it seem like you were to blame," he admitted. But sitting across from Isabella now, he realized the truth was far more complicated and painful than he had imagined. "He still visited," Yeppy continued, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But it was rare. Then the accident happened." His words faltered, and Isabella felt her chest tighten as the conversation neared the moment she dreaded most. "That day," Yeppy whispered, his voice barely audible, "it all happened so fast. Emmanuel was with someone, but I never knew who or what really happened. He was just gone. And all I had left was this watch." His gaze fixed on the object in Isabella's hands, as if it were the final thread connecting him to his son. Isabella closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She had been there that day, the day everything changed. The memory remained a wound that never fully healed. I was with him, she confessed, her voice breaking the heavy silence. We were on our way to a friend's house. But we never made it. The car, there was an accident. It all happened so quickly. When I woke up, she paused, her voice choked with grief, he was already gone. Her tears, long held back, began to fall as she buried her face in her hands. The pain she had carried silently for so long overwhelmed her in that moment. Yeppy, too, was overcome, silent tears streaming down his weathered face as he listened to her recount the final moments of his son's life. I never knew, he whispered, his voice raw with regret. I didn't even know you were there with him. Isabella shook her head, trying to steady herself, the grief shared between them pulling at her resolve. I loved him with all my heart, she whispered, her voice shaking. And I lost everything that day. She had tried to move on, but the past had always lurked just beneath the surface, ready to remind her of the pain. Meanwhile, Yeppy had fallen deeper into sadness and regret, until his life had become nothing more than what she saw before her now, a weary, old man struggling to survive the wreckage of his losses. I can't believe it, Yeppy murmured, shaking his head slowly. You were the woman he loved, and I never knew how much that meant to him. Isabella quickly wiped away her tears, fighting to maintain her composure. I never knew he was your son, she replied quietly, her eyes focusing on the watch in her hands. But seeing it now, everything comes flooding back. He always wore it, the gift I gave him when we started making plans for the future. She glanced at Yeppy, who seemed lost in thought, his eyes distant, focused on something long gone. He rarely spoke of you, she added softly, almost as if whispering. But I knew something was pulling him away from us. Victoria, my wife. She never accepted Emmanuel being with someone who wasn't our kind. She always wanted him to marry someone from a higher society, someone who could elevate our position. Her voice trembled with guilt and sorrow. Isabella nodded, understanding all too well. She hated me, she said quietly. Every time I tried to get close, I felt her disdain. And Emmanuel, trying to please everyone, was caught between two worlds. He was a good man, Yeppy. He wanted to make everyone happy, but that desire tore him apart. Yeppy took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly on the table. I never imagined it would end like this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. After he left, Victoria and I drifted even further apart. She blamed herself, and deep down, I think she blamed me too. That's when everything started falling apart. Isabella looked at him with deep empathy. How did you end up here? She asked gently, choosing her words carefully, aware that each one might reopen old wounds. Yeppy let out a heavy sigh, the weight of his story making his shoulders slump further. After Emmanuel died, Victoria, she was never the same. She sank into grief, and I lost my way too. Our marriage couldn't survive the guilt and the mourning. We drifted apart, and I ended up distancing myself from everything we had. We had a comfortable life, but the emptiness he left was unbearable. Victoria always blamed me. She'd say if I'd been firmer with Emmanuel, he might have chosen a different path. He stayed away from both you and me. I, in my weakness, believed for a long time that she was right. Hearing this, Isabella felt a heavy weight settle in her chest. It was hard for her to hear that Victoria had seen her as the cause of the family's collapse. Yeppy, she said gently, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes life leads us down paths we can't predict or control. What happened was an accident. But the love Emmanuel had for you, for me, that love was real. None of this changes that. Yeppy gazed at Isabella, his eyes filled with tears, clearly moved by her words. I never imagined I'd meet you, or that I'd discover who the woman my son loved truly was. This means more to me than I can express. Isabella reached across the table, gently placing her hand over his. We've both lost so much, she said softly, and somehow, that binds us together. I don't know why fate brought us here today, but I do know that we're here now, and maybe that has a greater purpose. They both sat in silence for a while, reflecting on the revelations and emotions that had surfaced. Emmanuel's watch still rested in Isabella's hand, and she carefully passed it back to Yeppy. He solemnly placed it back on his wrist. "This watch," Yeppy said, his voice tender, "is more than just a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol of the time we spent with him, of everything we shared, and though it's painful, it reminds me that time keeps moving, and we must find a way to move forward too." Yeppy offered a faint, sorrowful smile, understanding the weight of her words. "I don't know how to move forward," he admitted, his voice heavy. "After losing everything, Victoria and I ended up on the streets. Now we're just surviving." Isabella felt a surge of empathy so strong that it shifted her in her seat. "Where is Victoria now?" she asked, her heart tightening. Yeppy lowered his head. "She's waiting for me in a square nearby. We have nowhere else to go. And she's even more broken than I am." Isabella took a deep breath, sensing that something bigger was at play. "I want to see Victoria," she said firmly. "I want to help both of you. I can't change the past, but maybe I can help make the future better." Her heart raced as she walked beside Yeppy through the busy streets of the city. The words exchanged at the café still echoed in her mind. The father of the man she had loved was now walking beside her, and she was about to meet the woman who had always looked down on her. Isabella knew the encounter would be difficult, but something deep inside told her that it was the right step to take. Yeppy walked ahead in silence, his steps slow and weary, as if the years and hardships had drained all his energy. Isabella's gaze drifted across the city, but her thoughts were consumed with the upcoming meeting with Victoria. She had never imagined this moment would come. The thought of Emmanuel's mother made her shiver, but she knew she had to face her. Finally, after a few minutes, they reached a small square tucked between old buildings. It was a peaceful yet worn-down place, and Isabella braced herself for what was to come. The quiet square was a place where a few people sat on benches or strolled leisurely, but beneath the shadow of a large tree sat Victoria. The contrast between the woman Isabella had known in the past and the fragile figure before her was striking. Victoria, once proud and immaculate, now sat hunched, wrapped in a shabby old coat, her grey hair carelessly pulled back. Her eyes, once full of pride, now appeared dull, staring vacantly into space as she clutched a small bag at her side. Yeppy approached slowly, as though afraid of awakening something fierce. Isabella followed closely behind, her heart racing. When they were near enough, Victoria looked up with a tired expression that quickly shifted to one of surprise and confusion at the sight of a stranger beside her husband. "Yeppy," she murmured, her voice hoarse and weak, "who is this woman?" Yeppy hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Victoria," he said, his voice soft but steady. "This is Isabella. She was important to Emmanuel." The name Emmanuel fell between them like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension and repressed emotions through the air. Victoria's eyes widened upon hearing the name, and her recognition was immediate. "Isabella," she said, her voice laced with disbelief and anger. "You're the woman who took him from us. All of this, it's because of you." The accusation struck with the sharpness of a knife, and Isabella felt the weight of those words pierce through her. But she took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. She knew that any chance of reconciliation would require patience. "I understand how you feel, Victoria," Isabella said, her voice calm yet firm. "But I'm here to help. We can't change what happened in the past, but maybe we can find a way to move forward." Victoria shook her head, her hands trembling as she gripped her bag tighter. "You don't understand. I've lost everything. My children, my life, nothing makes sense anymore." Isabella's heart ached as she saw the raw pain in Victoria's eyes. There was no denying that this woman had been utterly shattered by the loss of Emmanuel. Yeppy knelt beside Victoria, gently holding her hands. Dear, I know you've suffered. I have too. But we found Isabella today by chance, and she's willing to help us. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past. Victoria glanced from Yeppy to Isabella, her face a mixture of confusion and sorrow. Why now? She asked, narrowing her eyes as if searching for an ulterior motive behind Isabella's intentions. Why after all this time? Despite everything they've been through, Victoria's voice trembled as she confronted Isabella. After all we've suffered, why now? You don't owe us anything. Isabella moved closer, kneeling beside Yeppy to meet Victoria at eye level. Her eyes were full of empathy, and her voice was gentle yet heavy with emotion. I loved Emmanuel, she said softly. I know we've lost so much, but I'm here because he taught me things I believe he would want me to pass on, like forgiveness and caring for others. And wherever he is now, I believe he would want me to reach out to you. Victoria fell silent, the only sound the soft breeze rustling through the trees. Isabella could see the internal struggle reflected in Victoria's eyes, caught between wounded pride and the longing to finally lay the past to rest. Finally, after a long pause, Victoria sighed deeply, as though releasing years of pent-up tension. I don't know what to say. Yeppy gently squeezed her hands, encouraging her. Just say you'll accept help, Victoria. We've lived like this for so long, maybe it's time for something to change. Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes as she allowed a little of her rigidity to melt away. I don't know if I can trust again. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, Isabella reassured her, her smile soft and encouraging. Let me help. We can take it one step at a time. I have space at my home, you can stay with me until we figure things out. Victoria looked at Yeppy, who gazed back with a mixture of hope and tenderness. Slowly, she nodded, tears slipping down her face. I'll accept. Isabella smiled, and in that moment, something began to shift. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, Isabella felt that everyone was moving toward healing. The next morning, the soft rays of the sun filtered into Isabella's cozy living room. Yeppy and Victoria had stayed there the night before, still uncertain and cautious about the drastic changes in their lives. Isabella's home was warm and modern, a sharp contrast to the harsh reality Yeppy and Victoria had endured in the streets. Sitting by a large window with a cup of hot coffee in her hands, Isabella watched the sunrise, her thoughts tangled. The presence of Yeppy and Victoria in her home meant so much more than just charity. It was an attempt to heal old wounds, to forgive, and maybe, just maybe, find a path to peace. Victoria appeared in the doorway, still adjusting to the reality of being under Isabella's roof. There was something poignant about seeing the woman who had once been so proud and strong now so fragile, her shoulders hunched beneath the weight of the years. Victoria's eyes were tired, yet there was a subtle shift in them, perhaps a flicker of hope. She had risen early, and Isabella greeted her with a soft smile, gesturing to the sofa next to her. Would you like some coffee? Victoria paused, as though uncertain whether to accept the offer, but eventually settled slowly onto the couch. Yes, I'd like some, thank you. Isabella poured a cup and handed it to her. Victoria cradled the warm mug in both hands, allowing the heat to soothe her cold fingers. The air between them was thick with silence, but it was not unkind. I still can't believe I'm here, Victoria murmured, almost to herself, gazing at the coffee in her hands. If someone had told me years ago that one day I'd accept your help, would have laughed in their face. Isabella smiled, understanding the sentiment. I know what you mean. Honestly, I never imagined we'd be here together after everything that's happened. Victoria took a deep breath, as if bracing herself to speak a difficult truth. I never thought well of you, she admitted. When Emmanuel first spoke of you, I knew immediately that you were different from what I expected for him. I always wanted what was best for my son, and I thought that meant he needed to be with someone who could help him rise in life. Isabella stayed quiet, allowing Victoria to speak at her own pace, but her heart ached as she listened. But now, I see how wrong I was, Victoria continued, her voice trembling. I lost my son. I lost my life. And I blamed you for so long. I blamed you for taking Emmanuel away from us, for being the cause of all our misfortune. But the truth is, what happened was much bigger than any of us. Isabella's throat tightened, hearing the confession she never expected to hear. I never wanted to take him from you, she said softly. I loved Emmanuel, but I know he loved you both. His decision to distance himself wasn't easy. He always wanted to make everyone happy. Victoria nodded, tears starting to fall. I was blinded by pain and pride. I held on to that resentment for years, and it destroyed us. Not just me, but Yeppy, too. When Emmanuel left, I lost my balance. And now, all these years later, I see that you weren't the one to blame. I just didn't know how to cope with the loss. Isabella felt her own tears rise as the weight of Victoria's words sank in. We've all lost, Victoria. I lost the love of my life, and you lost your son. We've both suffered in different ways, but neither of us came out unscathed. Victoria quickly wiped her tears away, trying to retain some semblance of dignity. I don't know how to thank you for helping us now. After everything I've put you through, Victoria's voice faltered, but Isabella met her gaze with understanding. I'm not looking for thanks, Victoria, Isabella replied softly. What I truly want is for all of us to find some peace. We've let guilt and resentment weigh us down for too long, it's time to let them go. If not for ourselves, then for Emmanuel. A shy but genuine smile crossed Victoria's lips. He would be happy to see this, wouldn't he? She asked tentatively. Isabella's misty eyes met hers, and she nodded. Yes, he would. Their moment was interrupted by Yeppy entering the room, bringing with him a lighter energy. He appeared more at ease, as though the simple comforts of shelter and rest had begun to renew him. The two of you are talking, he said with a faint smile. That's got to be a good sign. Victoria and Isabella exchanged a glance, and a quiet laugh broke between them. Yes, Yeppy, Isabella replied, gesturing for him to join them. We're finally starting to leave the past where it belongs. Yeppy sighed, a weight lifting from his shoulders, and sat beside Victoria, gently taking her hand. I've known for a long time that what we were doing wasn't living. Losing everything consumed us. But maybe now, we can find a second chance. Isabella watched them with a glimmer of hope. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, she said kindly. But I also hope, in time, you'll find something more permanent. You deserve a fresh start. Victoria tightened her grip on Yeppy's hand, a timid smile forming. Thank you, Isabella. Maybe this is our chance to finally let Emmanuel rest in peace. The days passed quickly after that morning of reconciliation. Yeppy and Victoria began to adapt to their new life under Isabella's roof. The once tense atmosphere, thick with unspoken grievances, gradually transformed into one of peace, something they hadn't felt in years. Isabella devoted herself to creating a nurturing space for them, offering not just a home but a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, as Isabella sorted through papers in the living room, Yeppy approached and sat beside her. His expression was distant, yet his eyes carried a quiet determination. Isabella, he began, his voice steady, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I don't want you to feel like we're taking advantage of your kindness. Victoria and I have been here for some time now, and we're incredibly grateful for everything. But I believe it's time for us to start looking for a more permanent place. Isabella looked at him, her surprise mingled with admiration. Yeppy, you're not taking advantage of anything, she assured him. I'm helping because I want to, and because I know, in some way, it's what Emmanuel would have wanted too. I want to help you move forward, too, Isabella said warmly. But I understand what you're saying, you want something that feels truly your own. Yeppy nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. I think it's time for us to build something again, even if it's small. Just a place we can truly call home. Isabella smiled, touched by his honesty and determination to start over. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "You don't have to do this alone, though. I'd love to keep helping, but in a new way. We can search together, find somewhere cozy where you can begin this new chapter with dignity." Yeppy's eyes glistened with emotion. "I can't thank you enough for everything," he said. "After so long without a home, I never thought I'd have a shot at a normal life again." "You deserve this chance," Isabella replied gently. "And so does Victoria. I'm so happy you're ready to take this step." As they talked, Victoria entered the room, her curiosity piqued. She glanced between the two of them before asking, "Are you talking about moving out?" Isabella nodded with an encouraging smile. "Yes. Yeppy feels it's time to look for a place of their own. I think it's a wonderful idea. What do you think? Are you ready for this?" Victoria let out a hesitant sigh, the weight of the decision clear in her voice. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I feel safe here. After everything we've been through, the thought of leaving again makes me nervous." Moving closer, Isabella took Victoria's hands in hers, holding them firmly but kindly. "I understand. No one's saying this has to happen right away. We can do it at your pace, whenever you feel ready. What matters is knowing you'll always have a home, wherever you go, and I'll always be here for you." Victoria looked at Yeppy, who gave her a reassuring nod, his expression full of quiet support. After a deep breath, she nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time to start fresh," she said. "But I want to do it knowing we're not alone." "You'll never be alone," Isabella assured her. "This is a journey we'll take together." Over the following days, Isabella committed herself to helping the couple find their new home. They pored over property listings, explored different neighborhoods, and, after weeks of searching, they found a simple but charming house. It was located in a quiet area near a park, offering them a tranquil space to start rebuilding their lives. When the house was chosen, Isabella assisted with the move, ensuring everything was ready for their first night in their new home. Though nervous, Yeppy and Victoria were thrilled to finally call the cozy space theirs. That evening, as they settled into the snug living room, they couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and hope, ready to embrace the fresh start ahead. The modestly furnished living room, illuminated by soft light, symbolized a fresh start for Yeppy and Victoria. That evening, as Isabella said goodbye in front of their new home, Yeppy hugged her warmly. "You've given us something we can never repay, the chance to be a family again." Isabella, deeply moved, smiled. "You don't owe me anything. Just live this new life with all the love and gratitude in your hearts. That's more than enough." Victoria, who had often struggled to express her emotions, stepped forward and embraced Isabella tightly. "I never thought I could forgive or move on, but now I see that forgiveness sets us free. I'm so grateful for this chance you've given us." Isabella nodded gently, her eyes filled with affection. "We're all healing together. Emmanuel would be happy to see this." As she left them standing on the threshold of their new home, Isabella felt a sense of lightness. The pain of the past had begun to fade, replaced by the hope of a peaceful future. In the weeks following their move, Yeppy and Victoria slowly adjusted to their new lives. The simplicity of their little house brought a calm they hadn't felt in years. Walks in the park, shared meals, and quiet moments together became soothing rituals that nourished their weary spirits. Isabella frequently visited, ensuring they had everything they needed. What started as brief, formal visits gradually turned into longer, relaxed gatherings filled with laughter and shared stories. Isabella's efforts had provided them not only a physical home but also an emotional one, a place where love and forgiveness could flourish. One sunny Sunday afternoon, Isabella decided to surprise them. She invited Yeppy and Victoria to spend the day at her home. When they arrived, they were greeted by the inviting aroma of a carefully prepared meal and Isabella's warm smile. "You've come on the perfect day," Isabella said, leading them to the dining room. "I have a surprise for you." Curiosity lit up their faces as they exchanged glances, knowing whatever Isabella had planned would be meaningful. As they admired the beautifully set table, the door to the living room opened. A tall, smiling young man stepped inside. Isabella stood up, her eyes sparkling, and walked toward him. With a heartfelt smile, Isabella introduced the young man who had just entered the room. "Yeppy, Victoria, this is Esteban, my son," she said, her voice filled with pride and emotion. "He just returned from university and has been eager to meet you." Victoria's face lit up, and Yeppy's eyes sparkled with genuine joy as Esteban approached the table, extending his hand in greeting. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," he said warmly, shaking Yeppy's hand firmly and offering Victoria a gentle hug, which she accepted with a tender smile. "You look so much like your mother," Yeppy remarked with a soft laugh. "It's clear she raised you well." As Isabella watched the interaction, her heart swelled with gratitude. This moment was more than a simple introduction, it symbolized the weaving of new bonds, an expansion of the love and forgiveness she had worked so hard to nurture. To her, Esteban's presence represented a continuation of the legacy left by Emmanuel, her late husband, who never had the chance to meet his son. Yet, in this moment, Yeppy and Victoria were meeting a part of Isabella's world, one that carried hope for the future. Throughout lunch, the conversation flowed naturally. Yeppy and Victoria, once burdened by years of pain, now seemed lighter, more at ease. After the meal, Isabella invited everyone to the garden for coffee. Esteban, ever attentive, helped Yeppy to the outdoor seating while Isabella and Victoria strolled along the flower-lined path, chatting about the vibrant blooms. As they sat outside, the setting sun cast a warm glow over the scene. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost perfect. Breaking the comfortable silence, Victoria spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I never thought I'd feel this way again, the sense of family, of belonging. I thought those feelings had died with Emmanuel." Isabella reached out, gently holding Victoria's hand. "We're rebuilding together," she said reassuringly. "Now, we have the chance to create new memories, ones that will carry us forward." Yeppy, gazing at the horizon, added thoughtfully, "You know, Emmanuel left us with so much more than we realized. Even in his absence, he continues to bring us together. It's as if he's here, watching us finally find peace." Esteban, who had been listening quietly, leaned in and spoke with calm wisdom. "A person's legacy never truly fades. Emmanuel was such an important part of your lives, and now you're all part of mine. I'm so grateful for that." A single tear slipped down Victoria's cheek, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. "You're incredibly kind, Esteban," she said with a smile. "In some way, I believe we're all connected by something greater." The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a harmony of heartfelt conversations and warm laughter, solidifying the bonds they now shared. As the evening settled, a sense of reconciliation filled the air. Isabella accompanied Yeppy and Victoria back to their new home, where heartfelt hugs were exchanged. The couple promised that this wouldn't be the last time they gathered like this, solidifying the bond they had built. Walking back with Esteban, Isabella felt a deep sense of closure. The shadows of pain and grief would always be a part of their story, but the path ahead now gleamed with hope and renewal. After enduring months of heartbreak and resilience, Isabella, Yeppy, Victoria, and Esteban had found the peace and love they had been longing for. Each of them, shaped by the scars of the past, had learned to forgive and move forward. They were now connected by bonds stronger than mere blood. Isabella, once burdened by the loss of Emmanuel, felt a profound gratitude and serenity. Yeppy and Victoria, once engulfed by sorrow, rediscovered the beauty of a simple life and the joy of shared love. Esteban, with his youth and generosity, brought fresh hope and a sense of continuity to their lives. In the end, they became a family reborn, united through forgiveness and strength. Together, they created a home filled with love and optimism, ready to face the future with courage. The pain of the past no longer defined them, instead, it became the foundation for a brighter tomorrow. Love and reconciliation had transformed them, offering a fresh beginning filled with endless possibilities.